I graduated college about 4 decades ago. I can remember very distinctly in my business classes that was taken back at Murray State University that the question was asked and discussed at length: how do you motivate people? Well, after I left those hallowed halls of higher education at Murray State University, I went immediately into the business world where I have worked until today. Almost every day for the last 40 years, I've been in direct contact with, and oftentimes in direct communication with, managers, supervisors, executives of all sizes, shapes, and demeanors. And it's amazing how many times that conversation I first heard back in college continues to be asked, the question, how do I motivate people, and discussed at length even today. Well, I want to talk about motivation. In fact, I want to talk about 2 types of motivation: internal motivation and external motivation, with more of a focus on external motivation for our purposes here today. Let me simply say that I believe in motivation. I believe in motivation in a big way. I believe people are motivated, but I don't believe they're necessarily motivated by what you or I may want them to be motivated by. Internal motivation comes from within the individual. Internal motivation is based on attitude and values. It's determining what I want and need and what I'm willing to sacrifice to accomplish those things. Those are things that I do in my heart, in my head, in my being. And I believe they are motivational. But for many of us, those of us in leadership positions, managers, supervisors, executives of all kinds, quite frankly, that takes too long. It takes too long for me to get to know each individual and figure out individually what motivates him or her. So instead, over the years, organizations have tried to rush the process, and we'll call that external motivation. External motivation is something that happens from outside of the individual, to change the inside of the individual. Well, it's nice to talk about. Unfortunately, it just rarely happens. External motivation is something that an organization can provide, that an individual or an organization can provide for another individual in hopes that what we're providing externally, giving them, will actually motivate them. Well, here's the truth. External motivation does work. External motivators do change behaviors in the short term. Unfortunately, it normally doesn't change habits over the long term. External motivation may make a manager or a supervisor feel good in the moment, but the individual is still trying to determine, will this help me satisfy my needs and wants and desires and all those other things long term? Oftentimes they don't. That doesn't change the fact that organizations still want to change behaviors of individuals, so they continue to explore or experiment with different external motivators. I want to give you 3 to talk about today. Now remember, I said external motivators will change behavior, individual behavior, in the short term. They just don't last long term. And number 2, I said that external motivators are provided by the organization or individuals representing the organization. Let's talk about the 3 primary external motivators that you see in organizations today. The first one, and probably the most obvious one, is what I'll refer to as rewards. Rewards. Now, a lot of people go, oh, yeah, that's money. Well, money is a reward. There's no question about that. But it's not the only reward. There can be other rewards like benefits, and there can be opportunity, promotion. There can be status and prestige. These are also rewards. But they're only a reward if a person values those things. Believe it or not, not everybody works for money. Oh, they accept the check and they're happy to get it, but that may not be the primary motivator for one employee, money, whereas it may be the primary motivator for another. So if it's a primary motivator for one and we say we're going to give you more money, certainly they're going to change their behavior. But if money is not the primary motivator, they'll take your money, but probably the behaviors won't change that very much. Here's another thing that I always tell people about rewards. No organization, none, I don't care how profitable or how asset laden that organization may be, no organization has pockets deep enough to be able to continue to motivate people with money alone. And here's the reason why. As soon as you give me some, I'll be happy with that and thankful for it, and maybe I'll even change my behavior in the short term, but eventually I want more. And if you motivated me once and you conditioned me to expect that by way of money, then I'll just want more money before I do more. And after a while, that gets to be a tremendous, almost a dead-end loop. Most organizations can't continue to throw money at a problem. They have to find another way to motivate people. So, another external motivation, when money either doesn't work or can't work long term, well, this is a common one. We'll simply call it threats. Now, some people refer to this external motivation approach as being a threat of punishment or punishment itself. But I would argue threats are far more prevalent than the actual punishment. I mean, if you're a parent or a grandparent or you've been around one lately, how many times have you heard this conversation? Parent to child, grandparent to child. Hey, I'm gonna discipline you if you don't stop that. Well, punishment? No, it was a threat of punishment. And then what happens to the child? Well, the child just looks at him and continues to do whatever. Now, I mean it this time. I'm really going to punish you this time if you continue to do that. Well, the child continues to do it, and the punishment never comes. The threat is what we're attempting to externally motivate the individual. Now, will punishment work? Well, that's debatable. You can talk to all kinds of sociologists about the value of corporal or the value of punishment of one type or another. But even the most die-hard individuals who are against punishment will tell you the only way for punishment to work is it must be swift and severe. Swift and severe. And because most people either can't or won't follow through with swift and severe punishment, they fall back on the threat of punishment. Now, will the threat of punishment motivate someone? Yeah. Remember what I said, temporarily, short term. External motivation will motivate temporarily and short term, but for how long? Well, until number one, it's obvious that the punishment will not come. It's just a threat. But then number two, here's an interesting thing. When you threaten someone, then quite frankly, they look for an opportunity to get even with you. In other words, when you try to impress upon them and get them to do something by way of a threat, they start thinking about how can I get even with you because of how uncomfortable you've made me. Have you motivated that person? Yes, probably, but not in the way that you wanted. In fact, they're not focused on what to do well, they're focused on how to get even. It's an interesting thought. So there are two of the three external motivations. There is rewards. Will it motivate? Yeah, temporarily and short term, but reinforcing it becomes difficult. The second one was threats of punishment. Will threats of punishment motivate? Well, for some they will, but it may actually motivate them to do things that you don't want them to do. So what's the third type of external motivation that organizations and individuals oftentimes fall back on? Well, it's the one that's the hardest for people to recognize, and yet I would argue, and to some degree, it's the most common. What is it? Promises. Promises. Now, you may not have thought about this one, so take just a minute to process this. Promise. Will a promise motivate someone to do something? Well, I would argue yes, temporarily and in the short term. Why? Because if I promise you, if you do this, then you'll get that. Well, if what I'm going to get is something that's very desirable, then okay, thank you. I appreciate the promise. And that promise will continue to motivate until one of two things happen. Either you actually get what you want, and then you have to make another promise to get me to do more, or worse still, I don't get what you promised. In other words, you promised it, but you didn't follow through on the promise. By the way, there's such a thing that's called implied promises. Now, this is where you don't actually say, I promise you blank, but you imply that a promise is being made. For example, How many times have you heard a manager say something like this? Keep working hard. I'm going to take care of you. Or what about this one? Don't worry. You're next on the list. Or how about this one? Trust me, everything's going to work out fine. Just count on me. Now, in none of those three situations did I actually say, I promise you you'll get this, or I promise you this will end up that way. But I certainly implied it in all three of those situations. So if one or more of those three things do not happen, then who's held accountable for it? Well, of course, the person who's made that promise or that implied promise. And he or she is held responsible by the person who is expecting to get something as a result of the implied promise that was made. In any event, if the behavior is changed, it's probably only changed temporarily and for a short-term period of time. But if the promise is not kept, then the relationship could be damaged simply because I don't trust you anymore. You promised me, you did not follow through on it. I can't trust you. External motivation. It's an interesting concept, and it's one, as I said, that's been talked about for decades, and I'm pretty sure it'll be talked about for decades to come. We're talking about it right now. I want you to think about it. I want you to think about how motivation actually works and how you can, in fact, help an individual stay motivated by trying to figure out what their actual needs are, what their actual wants are, what's happening internal to them instead of just depending upon external motivation. I think you'll be better for it. I think they'll appreciate you. And I know these are the kinds of things that leaders ought to know.